Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'd really like to just quickly introduce my panel before we jump in. Grant Swanepoel is a regional lead, Global Channels and Alliances, Middle East and Africa, ASCM. We've seen him already present during the course of this conference. He's responsible for maintaining and building relationships with global partners. He's worked in the supply chain field for the past 15 years. And we're really happy to have you here. Then we've got another Swanepoel, Dries Swanepoel. Have you guys established if you're related or not? Principal Market Development Specialist, Green Hydrogen, Low Energy Carbon Solutions from Sasol. So we're really lucky to have you here, Dries. Thank you. He's a seasoned senior manager for capital products and portfolio management, boasting extensive experience in overseeing daily business operations while developing and implementing robust growth strategies. Dries is a transformational leader with hands-on experience in, amongst others, optimizing businesses, processes, and procedures, overseeing the entire control system design and automation function, and the ability to direct the entire project management office design function. Alan, welcome. Alan Booth, Executive Manager, IPSA. He's currently consulting on lean, best practice in supply chains, including health and safety and environment. He also partnered with a consulting company, CCI Growth, a company that consults on world-class manufacturing, including supply chains. So welcome. So, as I mentioned in my previous talk, we have this big problem of global emissions that need to be reduced down to net zero by 2050. A supply chain is a tricky space to do that. We have a lot of partners that we need to collaborate with, and obviously transport is a massive priority area. Grant, can you please give the audience a perspective on what tools are there available for supply chain practitioners to manage and measure supply chain emissions, and how they could potentially help us get to this goal of net zero by 2050?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I've actually been involved with a couple of projects and working with some of the ASCM partners, particularly in the Middle East. They have in Saudi Arabia, for example, have a 2030 vision, and in that 2030 vision, there are elements of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So ASCM actually does offer a framework. We call it the Enterprise Standards for Sustainability. It is a list of standards or set of standards, criteria across the different dimensions of sustainability. We know that sustainability is not just the green aspect, it's the ethical and the economic piece as well. I think for today's discussion, we're pretty much focusing on the green aspect a little bit. But it absolutely provides a framework in which an organization could assess how well are we doing in each of these specific areas. So just to maybe give a little bit of a view, if that's okay, with sort of the prioritization of the types and levels of sustainable elements that exist within this particular model. So if we look at the very basics, right, most organizations would do something related to energy, water, and waste, right? They have initiatives in place. They are doing solar panels. They've got water reduction or water reuse programs in the factories and stuff like that. So that's very common. Moving up the list, we see things like material utilization. So what materials are we using? And I know that that's a part of your discussion as well. Your area of expertise is what materials are we using? Are they harmful to the environment from a tier 2, tier 3 perspective? Are they harmful from an ethical perspective as well? Climate strategy would be taking it up a notch, right? Does an organization have a climate strategy in place? Looking at what are the strategic directions that we'd like to go from a green perspective. Moving up to product lifecycle management, right? That end-to-end piece from cradle to grave. What do we do in the manufacturing process, delivery, sourcing, and also disposal of the product right at the end? So looking at this really much more strategically. It's not everyone measures this, right? People measure manufacturing pretty much only, and maybe a little bit of the deliver piece as well, sometimes sourcing. But to think through that ultimate view, even utilization of the customer, right? How do they utilize the product? And really taking this up to the top level, we would talk about circular economy. And circular economy is not necessarily only within one organization. It could be multiple industries interacting with each other, where one man's waste is another man's gold, right? Using byproducts from specific industries as an input into others. So within the model, like the framework that ASCM provides, these types of levels are actually clearly laid out. So you as an organization could assess yourself and say, what components of these do we actually do?
Oh, fantastic. And Dries, as transport is a massive part of any supply chain, and it carries with it quite a big carbon emission footprint. Can you give us a view on, there's not too many things one can do to start making transport net zero other than looking at alternative fuels and technology. Can you give us a bit of a feel, the audience, a sense of what is happening in the alternative fuels space for transport?
Thank you, Liesl. Very interesting question. Definitely correct in saying from a logistics perspective and specifically looking at freight and moving goods around, logistics companies and supply chains are heavily reliant on technology and alternative fuels. So from an alternative fuel perspective, obviously you can look at improving the quality of our existing fuels, liquid fuels as we know it today. And then you can also look at alternative types of fuels that are available. You can either look at, in some cases, people are demonstrating and exploring what is possible from a carbon reduction perspective, looking at natural gas, liquefied natural gas. You can look at batteries. And then you can also look at something like hydrogen, and specifically then green hydrogen. Is there a silver bullet or one single technology or fuel that will be able to serve all of the requirements and use cases? The answer is no. So it's not an or situation, but an and it will be a combination of these and technologies and alternative fuels. So if we look at logistics, and there's various types of segments in which you can divide it into, something like green hydrogen definitely have a role to play if you specifically look at long-haul, heavy-duty transport. If you look at shorter distances, there's something like battery electric is something that you can consider. And then obviously if you're in your city setup, there your EVs is something that definitely makes sense. So it's definitely a combination of fuel types and technologies that will be at play. I think an important question is the internal combustion engine as we know today. If you look at supply chains and how that supply chain is made up, it's probably one of the most well-developed supply chains out there. Will that disappear overnight? No. So not without a fight.
I'm sure. So I'm sure many transporters in the audience will agree with you.
So specifically from an alternative fuel perspective, if you look at internal combustion engines and what we see is happening in the world out there, there's definitely entities and OMEs that are, or OEMs that are looking at what can you do with that engine to improve efficiency. From a current liquid fuels perspective, and those things are quite well developed. Then you can look at, specifically, if you look at heavy duty applications, is there an option where you can co-feed? In other words, you can, through your combustion chamber, use diesel and hydrogen. So that is an interesting development that is currently taking place. And then in further development and almost call it lab scale type of exercises on the go, some of those entities are looking at, can you actually just use hydrogen in an internal combustion engine? So internal combustion engines, if you look at the manufacturing process, spare parts, all of those things optimized to probably the best level possible, and definitely something to look out for and see how you can transition that existing logistics and supply chain and transition it into looking at alternatives.
And I guess linked to this, which is really important, is the infrastructure. I mean, you're going to need charging stations and you're going to need places where you can drive your green hydrogen truck and get refueled. And I mean, that's a whole, I think, other conversation, but it does go hand in hand if you're looking at continuous supply and not interrupting your supply, which is quite important, you know.
Very valid. Infrastructure, you basically sit with a chicken egg situation. You require, for instance, vehicles to justify the investment in infrastructure. If you can't bring a vehicle in if the infrastructure is not there. So you have to co-develop and co-create this and put the necessary infrastructure in place. But doing that, you have to think very carefully and plan properly in terms of that initial rollout, specifically from a capital investment perspective.
So this is a bit of a tricky question, but so Sasol, for example, is responsible for the fuels, the OEMs do the technology development for the vehicle. Who is responsible for the infrastructure development?
So to let you in there in terms of what Sasol's strategy is, so we see ourselves as the supplier of fuel, something like hydrogen, whether it's electricity charging points, it's a form of energy. Sasol is an energy company, and that energy can take on various forms. So we're busy developing our electromobility strategy to stay in step with how industry is developing and to make sure that we're that one-stop shop for a logistics company, albeit to charge his vehicle that is doing courier services, using hydrogen in long-haul heavy-duty applications, or just your normal liquid fuels, as we know today. Okay. So that's one part in supplying the fuel, and then from an infrastructure perspective, we see ourselves very nicely positioned to also play a leading part in supplying that infrastructure in terms of the refueling itself, because it's well aligned with our existing retail footprint.
Oh, fantastic. So Grant, you raised a very important part about circular economy, which leads me to Alan. Alan is very passionate about his role in the packaging industry, and I mean, packaging does play a very, very important role in a supply chain. We take it for granted sometimes, but it also provides a bit of a headache in terms of waste reduction. So over to you, Alan.
Yeah, the first thing I would say is that there's a lot of basics that are really not in place. I sit in quite a few forums and we talk about the most basic things and they're not there. Example I showed, about 40% of South Africans don't even have formal waste disposal. So how on earth are you going to sort anything? And you wonder why it's blowing against fences and landing up in rivers for a start. But what ultimately needs to happen, of course, is we want to bring as much as we can back into the circular economy. But I think it was alluded to earlier as well, is that not everything can go in if you've got different materials. I'll speak to it. But, you know, that's the aim. And if I'll touch on it, I'll rather say in my presentation, I'll show you the people that are really helping us in the circular economy, and who really need to be valued.
Yeah, fantastic. Are there any questions from the audience at all? Yes.
How much international collaboration? Sorry, okay, is that better? How much international collaboration is there with Sasol on the development of hydrogen and green alternative transport?
Thanks for that question. So from a Sasol perspective, we see it as an imperative that you have to collaborate. No single entity can do all of this on its own. It's immensely capital intensive. So from a collaboration perspective, if you look at technology in the production of hydrogen and you look at electrolysis, we're monitoring that space very closely. We live very close to those technology suppliers and we're collaborating with those as well to understand exactly when those cost curves will start to come down, because that will also trigger your timing of your investment. At this stage, given the scarcity and the limited production capacity of that piece of technology, it's very expensive. But what we see is that gigafactories are being set up, and with that coming in, your cost curve will start to come down. So we collaborate very closely with them in the production side. On the customer side, and looking at green hydrogen and the use cases, similar story. We see it specifically from a South African context, very important to see how we can assist South Africa Inc. to get to a point where we can go through this just transition and also assist government with their key priorities in terms of unemployment, job creation. So we're looking at collaborating with those entities to see how much of that piece of work that is currently happening elsewhere internationally can be brought into South Africa from a localization perspective. So collaboration is critical for us, and we do collaborate both on the production side as well as on the customer side.
Over here. This gentleman, and then Douglas.
Thanks. I wanted to ask in terms of, it might be for you, Dries, again, the aspect of where they say gas is a transition energy towards before you get to the hydrogen and the solar and so forth. What's your view in terms of South Africa for gas being a transition energy, or are we wasting time, rather go for the greenest?
Also a very important question. I think if you look at SA Inc. and where we are in terms of just our own economy, the health of that economy, the amount of resources we have available, I think Alan alluded to the very basic needs and some of those challenges that we sit with in our country. So we are unfortunately not in that fortunate position like in Europe, where some of those entities get government incentives to drive this. In a country like ours, we have another level of a problem that we need to solve, and that is at a Maslow base layer, where there's people that don't have food, don't have clothes. So jumping from where we are today to something like green energy, which is you can almost classify it as the sexy solution, it's just not going to be feasible. So it's definitely going to be a transition phase that we're going through. In terms of the speed of that transition, that is something to be on the lookout for, to see if it is possible to attract investment that can create and stimulate this transition process. Obviously, it will help us a lot, but there's definitely going to be a transition. It will not be a step change that we're going through. It's just not feasible. Not only for South Africa, but even if you look at Africa as a continent as well, there's some other challenges that we're confronted with. Not to say that we should not be exploring that end in mind yet. It's we need to keep our eye on that end in mind picture and see how can we work back and see how quickly can we go through this and address all of the challenges that we have within South Africa.
Sorry, one more question, and then we'll go over to Alan's presentation.
So just hitting on the topic that both Grant and Alan spoke about, it's circularity. So you spoke about the need for more formalized rubbish collection, if you will, as a key part of that. And I think it's really interesting is particularly around things like collection of plastics and things of that sort, to re-enter that into a circular economy means that we have to develop that part of our link with equity and dignity. So I'd like to know what your thoughts are relative to the corporate and government contribution to equalizing that portion of the supply chain.
Well, I think Alan's presentation is going to be addressing that. If you can just pass the clicker to him.
There will be quite a lot of your question that I will answer in the presentation. I think there is more facilitation, and what I can say, leadership. I sit in lots of different forums and we talk about collaboration and what have you, and nothing happens. And it really needs to take leadership to start making things happen. And, within our informal sectors, I'll speak to it. And it is amazing what we can do. And in fact, amazing what we are already doing. And I hope that some of you will learn something.
Okay, over to you.
Okay. Okay. So, of course, the purpose-driven supply chain, alluding to the same question, we've got to feed as much as we can into the circular economy. I don't think there's anybody who disputes that. I just want to say that whatever I say is in my personal capacity, and whatever we discuss and whatever we present is in my personal capacity. I don't represent any organization or company. So if you want to be unhappy, please be unhappy with me, okay? I'm also very happy to be wrong, okay? So I really don't have any problem with that at all. I also want to say up front that all substrates with regards to packaging have a place, okay? Just so happens that plastics is right in the spotlight at the moment, and that's what I'll be talking to. Okay, all excited? Okay, here we go. All right, so let's get off. We're on the sustainability train, so let's get off the sentiment train and on board with the root causes and the facts. I already mentioned no silver bullets. There are no silver bullets. Okay. The hierarchy, I'm sure most of you know, with regards to waste management is first of all to reduce, of course. And that's with transportation and everything. And then to reuse, of course. And then to recycle. And then the next option is to actually, where you can actually gain energy from the products. And then last thing you want to do is send it to landfill. I hope we all agree with that. Well, that's stated, okay? All right, so some surprises maybe, okay? So plastics all come from oil. Comes out of the fractional process, which is the tower there. At the bottom, bitumen drops out. At the top, you actually get gas, LPG gas. In between, we get all the diesels and petrols and everything else, okay? Now, in 2020, which is the last set of statistics, we had a plastic input recycling rate of 43%. So I think some of these numbers may astound you because of what you see. And I'll show you. Okay, so 43% of plastic that was put into the market was recovered and recycled. Okay, 296,500 tons was recycled and reused, okay, in that period, which is equivalent to 214,500 tons of CO2 being emitted from 45,000 cars traveling at 30,000 kilometers per annum. Are you awake? This afternoon, okay?
And Alan, am I correct in the understanding that about 80% of that recycled waste is informally done through waste pickers?
I'm getting there. Please don't. I know you've given me 5 minutes. I'm under the whip. I was 5 minutes, had to negotiate a few minutes more, so I'll try and speed up, okay? Okay, so what does that look like? You can do the calculations. Okay, an average fruit bag, we'll all understand what an apple bag looks like, okay? So weighs 52 grams, okay? So every day we're driving out 18 kilograms, according to what was recycled. Remember, it comes from oil, all of this, okay? So you're driving out per day 346 fruit bags, okay? Work out the CO2 content. I'm going to go through all the detail, 13 kilograms a day. All right, so please do drive home safely today. All good with that, eh? Okay, flexible packaging has a density of 0.9. I'll get to the content of that. Okay, so what are we being sold? Okay, what I didn't mention properly at the start of my presentation is, with regards to the sentiment, let's get the proper facts and the truth. Okay, now we know that paper is the most fantastic thing. We get the craft paper bag, isn't it? Plastics off the shelves. By the way, it takes twice the amount of energy to produce the same volume in a craft paper bag as to a polyethylene bag. A plastic one will weigh 8.5 grams, paper 35 grams. That tall spike that you see, that is the craft paper bag in terms of CO2 and methane emissions. If it goes to landfill, if it goes to recycling, fine. Okay. The bottom where you see all the little red rings, well, those are plastics. How terrible can plastics be? Oh, my word. Okay. We got it? Okay, don't ask me questions yet. Okay. All right, back to part of our circular economy, and what I was trying to allude to with the first question is, we just haven't got the basics right. And it's been for years now. It's like sitting in the colloquium, which the Minister of Environmental Affairs called way before the lockdown. And, these are basic things. So if you haven't got a formal waste disposal at your disposal, so to speak, what are you going to do? Now, if I just look at that, so about 40% of South Africans don't have that, okay? If I just look at that picture, I don't even think you'd have to educate those people that they must put it in a skip if you put a skip there. They're already putting it in one place. And you all agreed with me, of course. Okay, so next slide is PG16. All the people from out of Cape Town? Okay, please hold tight, okay? All right. So I think you would agree, Cape Town is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. But hey, we pump surreys into the sea. And we know how terrible earbuds are and how they mess up the environment and the toothpick things and what have you, all of those things, caps. So normally do beach cleanups every year, there's one. I did a webinar, so I had to, during the lockdown, so I had to ensure that it was still the same. Now, if you look at the next picture down, so what do you find on the beaches? Well, exactly that, because people are putting it in the toilets, we're flushing it down, and it lands up in the sea. Okay, this may surprise you. The number one item found on beaches internationally is, in fact, cigarette butts. But our heroes in our circular economy are our waste pickers. Okay, let's get to that. They really are our heroes. They need to be respected. And they form the backbone of our circular economy in terms of packaging. They really do. Okay? And you won't believe me, we, as South Africa, are one of the best mechanical recyclers in the world regards plastic packaging. And there was dead silence. So I would like to just put it, am I going too slow?
No, I think we should stop here on the heroes because it's a really good positive message to end, to just pause here for a second. Maybe a question to you, Dries. Biomass for fuel as an alternative fuel. Is it a feasible solution potentially as an alternative fuel?
It's definitely something that we as Sasol is busy exploring. So obviously if you've got hydrogen, you need a sustainable carbon source. In South Africa specifically, and the work that we're doing in terms of project development, that is one of the challenging areas in terms of finding a stable carbon source to feed into your process. So it's something that we're looking at, we're investigating it, but it's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
And I think if we can get that part right, from a technology and a process perspective, we've got things in place. The technology is agnostic to where that carbon is coming from. We just need the carbon.
Yes.
We've got ways and methods to create green hydrogen. So you can feed that into your process and you can start with e-fuel production. So finding that sustainable carbon source of a specific sustainable and stable quality is a bit of a challenge at this stage.
Grant, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, regarding the specific types of options, of course, there are many. The other one that I was just thinking about in terms of getting to us to our goal of net zero would be carbon offsets, because a lot of what we're talking about here is about things we want to, it's big things. It's like changing the way we fundamentally do production or do transportation. But there is another option, which is the carbon offset model, using things like carbon credits, for example, to support the development of that. It's not the perfect scenario because you're still producing the waste, but it's a route to start looking at the prevention of that into the future. So I think it's a definite option.
And the frameworks that we have can actually measure that because I mean, I think tracking this, tracking waste, tracking your emissions, tracking your impact is key critical in understanding and getting visibility of what your supply chain is, how your supply chain is performing in those areas. So it's really great that there are these frameworks that we can actually use and being tested and designed. So that's really, really awesome. Alan brought some wine with today, and he's going to just quickly talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
And the best questions win one each. So
there
best
are
you
three.
get your closing questions up.
3, okay. So just to follow on from that, I would like to challenge everybody in the audience. Next time you see informal waste pickers, by the way, the informal waste pickers are the best solution, but I don't want to go into all of that yet. There's actually a body that represents informal waste pickers. If you formalize it, they lose their jobs, okay? So, you know, we see these people, and do we respect them? So I'll challenge you, next time you see 1 or 2 or whatever, just stop. Just ask them their names. Tell them that you, even if you don't, tell them at least the country values what they're doing, and give them 20 Rand. They do a lot of work for very little money. And like I said, we are one of the best mechanical recycling countries in the world. Not because we're environmentally conscious, but because of these people. And everyone went, yes, we agree with that. Okay, so, oh no, plastics making school benches for the poor rural children. Oh no, that can't be right. Okay, so that's made from laminate materials, which you can't put into a single recycling stream. So anything you buy like a pouch, you'll feel it's a stiffer. Don't want to go into all of that, but there's more than one material. But if that's diverted, okay, this is pre-consumer. However, it would have gone to landfill anyway. And, you know, we can make, well, you've seen planks and all of those sorts of things, but, you know, I think that's not too bad. And, you know, you can even get, there's a particular one that's made from a PET bottle that has a 60% lower carbon footprint. And again, I take nothing away from any packaging media. Everyone has its role to play. Okay. All right, just to end off then. So at a recent Consumer Goods Council meeting, the topic was we've got in our country 51 million tons of food waste per annum. Okay. Now, so what can we do to reduce that? Well, there are multiple causes. I mean, obviously packaging is one of them. So if we package better, there are better technologies. I don't have the time to go into that now. But, you know, the thing is that we can do more. 1.5 grams of plastic will keep your cucumber fresh for 14 days. And everyone went, wow. So all I want to urge you to is let's get away from the sentiment and let's start looking for the facts properly. I mean, I talk to most people wherever, and it's for, oh, plastics, we hate plastics. Well, you better know why you hate plastics. Okay? Just get the facts and search for the truth, and then we'll make it better. And we can, because we are South Africans, and we already are in a lot of areas. And so I say thank you. Nkosi kakhulu.
Thank you, Alan. Just in closing, the question I'm going to pose to you, Grant, is net zero seems to be an audacious task. I mean, I know it's a long time frame, 2050. I think I worked out I'll be in close to my 80s by then, maybe. Is it possible? Is it doable? Are we chasing the magic unicorn, or do you think it's doable?
That's an interesting question. I think it is mainly doable. And the reason I say that is because we have the frameworks, we have the things like the GRI, for example, the metrics, the availability of all of these things, right? And you see the speed at which technology now is changing. There are countries in the world that are getting close to that number, and there's even countries that have shorter timelines, like the Saudi example that I mentioned, 2030 is their goal with specific visions and things like that. I think what we need to do is break it down into its different components, right? Understanding within the organization, there's 3 things for me. It's what is the policy around these things, right? How is our strategy? Do we have a strategy, first of all, talking to sustainability? Do we have the visibility around the metrics, things like the Global Reporting Initiative? And by the way, the SCOR model is going to be updated with sustainability metrics too in the future.
It's good.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that'll be part of the key attributes. And then finally, the actual measurement and enablement for us to do root cause analysis and corrective action on these things, just like we would with any other metric in the business. So that's the key, is bringing it in. Right? When we measure forecast accuracy, it results in us questioning it and changing the outcome or trying to change the outcome. So that for me is the starting point. That's where we are right now. And I think that's going to help us on that journey to get to this audacious goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Dries?
I want to answer it in the following way, and saying we need to start off by why we need to do this. I think from a humanity perspective, it's critical that we do something. And Alan showed us now what the size of the problem is in one area, how easy it is to have a solution in place, and it starts at the very basic level. So it's important that we do something. For SA Inc., it is critically important that we adapt, because our economy, our survival, our ability to be competitive relies on this, that we do something. And the reason why I'm saying that is, if you look at Europe and their Fit for 55 targets that they've put out, Grant mentioned now Saudi, for us to be competitive and produce products in South Africa and then be in a position to export those without incurring additional costs, and in that way be competitive, that's the reason why we need to do something. Okay, so what is it that we need to do, and what is it that each one of us can do at our own companies and entities or businesses, is to understand your complete value chain and make sure that everything is measured. And you understand exactly where those pinch points are, and then see what is it that you can do from an efficiency perspective to improve your efficiencies just at your own operations. So if it's a warehouse, even before something is put onto a truck, which requires the technology and alternative fuels to move, but at your warehouse, have you done everything to be as efficient and as optimized as possible? Then obviously there's those things that you at your own cannot do. You rely on something like technology or an alternative fuel. There's a missing piece of the puzzle. So in understanding your process, analyzing it, identify those areas where you do not have the expertise. And it's important that you understand that and be aware of it. Moving on to, okay, so how do we do this now? It's then, in terms of the circular economy, we call it ecosystems. You have to create that ecosystem, and you can only do it based on the previous points that I've raised in terms of our challenges within South Africa, if we collaborate through partnerships. Because if you look at this overall ecosystem and value chain, there's areas where someone else can bring something to the table that you need, but that you do not have. And you have to collaborate in that way. And why are these collaborations and partnerships so critically important? Is it lowers your cost barriers, it de-risks everything that you're doing, and there's a bigger chance of success. So that is why partnerships is so important. So I think that's
fantastic. Well,
important.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your insights. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Dries. Thank you, Grant. We've unfortunately run out of time, but there are 3 wine bottles up for grabs. So I think the gentleman at the back that asked the Sasol energy question, that one is for you. And right, best question next. We've got 2 up for grabs. Let's go. He's going to volunteer a question. Douglas? And there's a lady at the back. Fantastic.
I think the lady
It's not necessarily for the wine, but
yeah, millions will believe you.
I think it's controversial, and we can argue the pros and cons of governmental regulation in this space. So I'd just like to ask the 4 of you, just your view simply, do you hope that from an SA perspective, we increase the level of regulation, or that we hold steady?
I don't think regulation is going to make a difference. In fact, South Africa has got great legislation, phenomenal legislation actually, but the implementation of it is really not where it should be. So in my view, it's it's up to us to make that difference. If we sit back and wait for regulation to come into play, we are never going to reach this 2050 target. We have to be responsible corporate citizens. I know it sounds a little bit cliche, but it's really it's part of our role to make sure that we work together to see how can we do this, because it's going to make us more resilient and more adaptive in the long run. So it's a win-win. I saw a cartoon the other day which I absolutely loved. It says, "Wow, what if climate change is a hoax?" And there was a whole list of things: clean energy, clean water, reduced pollution, nature in a good place. Okay, well, I mean, if that's the byproduct, I'm not going to complain too much about that. And that's really what we need to look at. So, I don't know if anyone else wants to comment. Yes, sure.
Okay. So in some of these forums, lots of environmentalists. I'm an environmentalist. I think we all are, okay, to put it in perspective. But to answer your question, so they'll say, "Oh no, we've got to regulate." But as you've rightly said, it helps nothing. Well, not nothing, but precious little. What matters is taking the leadership. So we spoke about collaborate, and we need leadership and the political will to change some of the things. And over and above, it really does come down to that, and that's one of the things that I see sorely lacking. If that pulls on from your question, you didn't say leadership, but you were saying leadership.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, one more question, and then I'll give.
Okay, I'm asking the question for the wine.
Okay, all right, that's great. I like it. Authentic question.
Thanks, Liesl and team. Grant, I think the question is for you. Carbon offsetting, where do you start in your company?
Yeah, so there is actually open markets that exist out there. There's organizations and companies that facilitate carbon credits, purchase of carbon credits. Often what you'll see happening is there'll be, let's say, a new project in a developing country that is going extremely on the green route. They can sell carbon credits on the open market, and those credits could then be purchased actually by the open market, for example, in a country where there are targets, but it's very difficult to meet those targets from your emissions reductions. This is an option that big organizations do often take. And also the other one is within the company itself. So you measuring your own carbon emissions and then putting in place initiatives and projects that can assist you to offset those within your own company. So these are the two main options I think that could be explored further.
Dries, would you like to weigh in on that? Or not?
No.
Yeah. So, I know the carbon tax bill says it has to be a South African project in order to offset a carbon tax. And I think that is slightly problematic because we do not have a massive pool of projects in this country. So it's definitely an area that needs to be addressed and looked at for sure. But I think we've got a bit of time. But it's an exciting space, and carbon offsetting, we need to move away from the fact that it's just going to plant a few trees and you've offset your carbon. It's a lot more than that. So if we can invest in projects that actually uplift communities and create work and link to your supplier development sort of portfolio, then that'll be great as well. So that's kind of the Rubik's Cube puzzle that I think everyone's busy trying to align. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. I'm very cognizant that I'm keeping you from your lunch. Thank you very, very much for attending our panel today. And I'd really like to thank our panelists and a big round of applause for your contribution.